The train arrived with a slow groan of steel and grief. It came late that afternoon, trailing dust and smoke like a funeral procession, wheels shrieking against rusted rails that hadn't known joy in years. The station, if it could be called that, was nothing more than a tilted wooden platform surrounded by dry weeds and the brittle echo of town gossip. The town itself sat just over the ridge watching from windows, pretending not to, but the truth was always watching in the west. Silas McRae stood alone near the end of the platform, boots planted, hat pulled low, arms crossed against his chest like a man keeping something from spilling out. He wasn't there to meet anyone. He'd come for a saddle from Abilene and to avoid the memory of Sunday afternoons. A man with too much silence finds himself drawn to train stations, places where others might be arriving instead of leaving. The train hissed once and came to a stop. Doors clanked open. No music, no applause, no reason to smile. Then she stepped down. May Templeton was not what the town expected. She was large, visibly tired, her dress wrinkled from travel and patched at the hem. One child clung to her left hand, a boy, no more than 8, rail-thin with 2 large boots. On her right, a girl younger, maybe 6, had flower ribbons in her tangled hair and eyes full of questions. May had that look some women carry, like old quilts worn but still sheltering something warm underneath. The conductor stepped down behind her, shrugged, and tossed down her trunk with a thud. Then he climbed back on board and pulled the whistle. The woman didn't move. She turned her face toward the waiting platform, scanning the scattering of faces, searching for one she recognized. She smiled, first hopeful, hesitant, then waited. The smile faltered. 1 second. 2. 10. Nothing. The train wheezed into motion again. It left behind a dust cloud, a silence, and a woman holding her children's hands with no one claiming them. Silas watched. He wasn't the only one. Behind him, 2 women stood beneath a parasol, Mrs. Greer and her daughter, pretending to fan themselves while their whispers sliced the air. "I told you," Mrs. Greer hissed. He saw her picture and changed his mind. The ad said she had good hips. Didn't say she was a whole ox. "Poor children," the daughter whispered. She probably thought he'd love them too. "Mail-order brides are desperate things," Mrs. Greer said, as if May couldn't hear her. But May did. She heard everything. She looked again one last time for a man with flowers or a nervous smile or even an apology. Instead, she saw only empty space and judgment dressed in Sunday lace. Her son tugged at her skirt. "Ma," he said, "is this the right place?" She nodded slowly. "It's the right place," she whispered, "but maybe not the right man." She guided them toward the shade beneath the awning, sat on her trunk, and folded her hands in her lap. The children leaned against her sides. She smoothed their hair, kissed their heads, but her eyes never stopped scanning the road beyond the platform. Silas remained still. He told himself he had no business stepping in, that this was between the woman and the man who didn't show. But as he looked at the boy's scuffed boots, at the way the girl kept her ribbon from blowing away, at how May sat straight-backed like someone refusing to cry, he felt something shift in his chest. He walked to the edge of the platform and opened his canteen. Quietly he offered it. May didn't look up right away. Then she did. Their eyes met his worn brown ones, her glassy green ones, and in that space between strangers, something passed. Not a story. Not a rescue. Just a gesture. The children drank first. She thanked him with her eyes. He nodded once and sat near them on the edge of the platform. A respectful distance. A wordless offering. Silas hadn't spoken to a woman in weeks. Since Ella died, he'd kept mostly to himself. Horses didn't ask about grief. His cabin stayed quiet, his barn stayed neat, and his heart stayed buried somewhere between last winter and the war before that. "Was he here?" he finally asked, voice low, like dust rolling off stone. May shook her head once. "No." Silas didn't push. She sighed. "He answered my letters. Sent money for the train. Said he'd be here. Said he liked full women. Said he had a big house and needed a mother for his boys." The little girl, now sleepy against her shoulder, mumbled something about jam. "He lied," May said. Silas nodded. "Men do that. Women lie too," she added. "I told him I played piano. I don't. My hands swelled too much." Silas chuckled softly. "You lie better than him. At least you came." She looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't come for him," she said. "I came for them." The boy dozed beside her now, boots crooked. The girl lay across her lap, one ribbon gone, thumb in her mouth. May looked down at them with a kind of ache that Silas understood too well. "Where will you go?" he asked. She shrugged. "Nowhere in particular. I've been there before. It's not so bad." He leaned forward, resting elbows on his knees. I've got a wagon. And a bunkhouse out past the ridge. Horses too loud for neighbors to complain. May blinked. I'm not offering anything, Silas said. Just space. She searched his face for mockery and found none. Only a man used to silence and the company of animals. I won't be charity, she said, voice tightening. No, he said. You'll be shelter. She paused. For how long? He tilted his head. Until sundown. After that, we'll talk again. She watched him rise and walk toward the wagon, an old paint mare hitched to it, chewing her reins like a nervous girl. The wagon had dents and a patched canopy, but it looked solid. May didn't move right away. She stared at her children, then at the trunk that had cost her everything but held nothing she still believed in. Then she stood. They rode in silence for the first mile, dust curling behind them like a veil. Your name? She asked, breaking the quiet. Silas McCrae. Mine's May. He nodded. And them? Cal Junie. He tipped his hat at them both. By the time they crossed the creek, Junie was asleep on her mother's lap, and Cal was staring out with wide eyes like he was seeing land for the first time. You got animals? Cal asked suddenly. A few, Silas replied. A gelding who thinks he's a preacher. A mule who hates Sundays. Chickens that lay when they feel like it. Cal grinned. May's lips curved into the smallest smile. It disappeared quickly. The wagon creaked as they climbed toward the hill. From that height the town looked smaller. Less cruel. Just roofs and fences trying to pretend they were something more than dust. At the ridge, Silas stopped the wagon. You sure? He asked her. May nodded. No. Good, he said. Only liars are sure. They rolled down toward the barn, its paint faded and one shutter hanging loose. A windmill creaked in the wind. A dog barked once and gave up. Silas helped her down, steadying her hand but never lingering. Junie woke and whimpered. Cal jumped down and ran toward the trough. Chickens scattered like prayers. May stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse. It smelled like old wood and hay. A single cot. A chipped basin. A clean blanket. She turned to Silas. Why are you doing this? He studied her. Because I'd rather offer a roof than watch someone sit in the dust. She swallowed. You're not like the others. I was once, he admitted. Then I buried someone. That changes a man. May stepped inside. You don't even know me. Silas tipped his hat. I reckon I don't have toyed. He left her there with the children and went to check the horses. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched across the field like old regrets. Inside the bunkhouse, May opened her trunk. Inside were folded clothes, a worn photo, and a loaf of bread she had saved for the journey. She broke it into 3, gave 2 pieces to the children, and chewed hers slowly, eyes wet but chin lifted. Outside, Silas lit the lantern and watched the last light fall over the land. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that tonight, someone was under his roof who didn't deserve the dust of the platform or the sting of cruel eyes. And somehow that felt like the beginning of something. Not a rescue. Not yet a love story. Just a beginning. The next morning the sky rose slow and pale, like someone still deciding whether to show up for the day. Silas stirred the coals, boiled coffee black enough to wake the bones, and watched the horizon blush gold over the ridge. A rooster tried crowing but gave up halfway, defeated by the wind. May hadn't asked for anything. Not even a needle to mend the rip in her sleeve. She'd simply accepted the bunkhouse, folded the blanket, wiped down the basin with an old rag, and looked him in the eye like a woman who'd swallowed disappointment so often she'd stopped tasting it. She didn't flinch when the chickens squawked near the door or when the barn groaned in the night. She just moved slowly, carefully, the way heavy things learn to carry themselves with grace. The children were awake before the sun finished rising. Cal walked the fence line with his hands behind his back, mimicking Silas's gait, while Junie hummed to herself and tried naming the hens. May called her back gently, brushing burrs from her daughter's socks with a tenderness too quiet to perform. Silas leaned on the post and watched it all, how quickly the stillness of his ranch had shifted. It wasn't loud, but it had changed. He hadn't realized how long it had been since small feet had made the dust dance. Since laughter, even muffled, had wandered into his mornings. She joined him by the fence, arms folded, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. There was flour on her cheek and a bit of jam on her cuff. Someone had found the jar in the cellar. I hope you don't mind, May said. The girl found it. I told her not to touch things without asking, but jam's a hard temptation. I didn't hide it well, he replied. Was meant for winter. She said it tasted like summer, May murmured, watching her daughter skip through the grass. Silas smiled. then it's doing its job. A silence passed between them, not awkward, not strained. Just shared. I'll head into town today, he said eventually. General store run. She nodded. If you can find thread, I'll repay you in buttons. He glanced at her. I sew fast, she explained. Especially when I'm anxious. He nodded once and turned toward the barn. She hesitated, then called after him. Could we ride with you? He stopped. I don't want the children thinking we're hiding, she said. They need to see it. The town. Even if it doesn't want to see us. Silas studied her, then the children, then the road curling down toward town like a snake too tired to strike. All right, he said. We leave after breakfast. They rode in the same wagon, May up front with him, the children nestled in the back among feed sacks and empty crates. The road was rough in places, ruts still muddy from last week's rain, but the sky had cleared to a sharp blue that seemed to dare anyone to doubt it. Silas held the reins loose. He didn't ask questions. But May spoke anyway, in slow threads unraveled by the motion of the wheels. I was engaged once before, she said. Back in Illinois. His mama called me ample, like it was a disease. Said I'd smother his ambition with my shadow. Silas looked straight ahead. Thing is, she went on, he agreed with her. Just didn't say it until we were 3 weeks from the wedding. I had the dress. Ivory lace. Too tight. She let out a small laugh, not bitter. Just tired. I buried the dress. In the garden. Grew turnips over it. Silas blinked. They came in big, she added. Fitting. The wagon rolled over a rock and jolted. Junie squealed from the back. Cal caught her before she tumbled. May turned to look but didn't panic. The kind of mother who knew children learned balance by nearly falling. Silas said, You ever think of turning back? May squinted into the wind. Where would I turn to? He didn't answer. The town came into view slowly, like it regretted being seen. A row of wooden buildings with chipped signs, a church steeple leaning slightly, and the general store at the center like the mouth of a beast that gossiped instead of bit. People moved like ants, small, quick, full of purpose that wilted when they saw the wagon coming. By the time they pulled up, 3 men had stopped hammering outside the saloon to stare. A woman outside the dress shop narrowed her eyes and whispered to her daughter, who immediately began fanning herself despite the breeze. May saw it all. She helped the children down, smoothed their hair, adjusted Junie's ribbon. Then she straightened her shoulders and stepped onto the boardwalk like it was a stage she hadn't auditioned for but had no choice but to walk. Silas tied off the reins and followed her in. The general store bell rang overhead. Inside, the air smelled of molasses, nails, and soap. Behind the counter stood Henry Sykes, gray-bearded, thick-armed, never met a secret he couldn't resell. Well, he said slowly, eyeing May. Didn't expect you back so soon, Silas. I'm not back, Silas replied. I'm just here. Henry looked at May, then at the children. May met his eyes. We need thread. So. Why? And whatever you have for bruised feet. Henry hesitated. Might be out of lye. Silas stepped forward. Then we'll take soap. He began gathering supplies while May let the children point out licorice sticks and sacks of beans. One of the shop women leaned to another. That her? The bride who got stood up. Didn't get stood up, the other said. Just got seen. May heard that too. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned down to Junie. Pick 2 pieces, darling. One for you. One for your brother. Junie chose red. Cal said, I like licorice. Silas handed over coins without blinking. As they left the store, a girl from the church group, a blonde in high boots and stiff manners, approached. She didn't greet May, didn't look at Silas. Just bent to Junie and said, Is that your mother? Junie nodded proudly. The girl sniffed. She's very large. Junie blinked. She's soft. Softer than your mama, I bet. The girl stepped back, startled. May's cheeks flushed, but she didn't speak. She just took Junie's hand and walked past like wind through grass. They climbed into the wagon in silence. Halfway back, Cal finally said, That girl was rude. May answered softly, She's not mean. She's just small inside. Junie leaned against Silas's arm. He didn't move it. By the time they returned to the ranch, clouds had begun to gather, big ones, low, with bruised bellies. Rain on the edge of the world. Silas unhitched the wagon while May led the children to the bunkhouse. She didn't cry. Not then. Not when she unpacked the thread or soaked Cal's blistered feet or combed burrs from Junie's hair. But later, when the children slept, she crept into the barn. Silas was there oiling a saddle, lantern flickering gold against the beams. I wasn't snooping, she said. Just needed somewhere quiet. You're welcome here, he said. She sat on a hay bale, looked around. Smells like work, she said. He didn't reply. She held a spool of thread, twisting it slowly. Do you think I'm shameful? He set down the saddlecloth. No. The town does. I don't live for the town. She studied him in the half-light. Then what do you live for? He looked at his hands. Used to be Ella. Then it was just the horses. Lately, I don't know. Maybe mornings like this, when someone else is using the jam. May laughed quietly. He looked up. I've been called many things, she said. Loud, lazy, greedy, obscene. You'd be surprised how creative people get when they're uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable, he said. She tilted her head. Why not? Because I've known real shame, he said. It doesn't look like you. May's eyes welled. She blinked hard. That's kind. Don't be kind unless you mean it. I mean it, Silas said. She stood, brushing hay from her skirt. Well then, maybe you could teach the others. They won't listen to me, he said. She smiled. They might if I stayed. He stared at her, not answering. She reached the barn door, then paused, turned halfway. If I stay, she said, I'll need more than shelter. Silas swallowed. What more? May looked up at the sky, then back at him. Her voice was calm. Dignity, safety, and a place where my children can stand without shrinking. Then she stepped out into the gathering storm, leaving Silas in the flicker of lantern light, saddle half-oiled, the smell of hay thick in the air. He didn't move. Not right away. But somewhere inside him, something did. The rain came slow and steady, like an apology that didn't expect to be forgiven. It pattered across the roof of the barn, soft at first, then heavier drops slipping through the rafters in long threads, tapping the wooden floor with rhythm only silence could appreciate. Inside, the smell of damp hay and oiled leather mixed with something warmer, biscuits baking in a cast-iron pan, and the faint sweetness of boiled cinnamon water May had poured for the children's sore throats. Silas sat at his workbench, sanding the edge of a cedar fence rail, his thumb raw where splinters had claimed it. The barn was dim, lantern low, windows fogged by breath and weather. The world outside had vanished into mist. May entered without knocking. She carried a folded towel and a small jar of salve, the kind passed down from prairie women who trusted herbs more than doctors. Her dress was still wet at the hem. Her hair had come loose, soft waves falling past her shoulders. Silas looked up. You'll catch cold, he said. I was born in weather meaner than this. She set the towel on a beam and knelt beside a squealing hinge on the gate latch. With a spit of oil and a flick of her wrist, it went quiet. She smiled faintly. Silas offered her the stool beside him. She sat. For a while neither spoke. The barn creaked gently like it remembered being younger. May rested her hands in her lap, palms still red from scrubbing. Her wrists were stronger than they looked, hands that had carried hunger, held feverish children, buried dreams without ceremony. You work like you've been here forever, Silas said quietly. May looked down. I've worked everywhere like I belonged. It fools the children. You don't fool me. She looked at him, then a long look. I'm not trying to. Outside, thunder rolled far off, more rumble than warning. Inside, the only thing that moved was a hen pecking at grain. May stood, brushed off her dress, and wandered toward the back corner of the barn, the darkest part, where tools slept under canvas and old memories gathered dust. She stopped when her toe struck something wooden. It was a cradle. Small, smooth, carefully made. The kind a man carves with hope before reality has its say. One rocker had chipped at the edge, but the rest still held shape, still waited. Silas stood behind her, silent. I made it when Ella was expecting, he said. Didn't get used much. The baby didn't stay. May turned toward him, hands resting gently on the edge. Girl or boy? Would have been a girl, we think. She never got big enough to say for sure. May looked back at the cradle, and in her silence was a kind of prayer. Some cradles aren't for babies, she said. They're for reminders. Or beginnings. Or things you almost had. Silas watched her fingers trace the edge like reading a name carved in wind. I used to dream about houses, she said. Big ones. With porches and flower beds and a screen door that slammed because somebody was always coming in to say, Mama, look. But I always woke up in a rented room with one chair and no welcome mat. She knelt beside the cradle, brushing dust from the curved legs. When Cal was born, I thought maybe now, someone would see I was worth staying for. Then Junie came and I stopped dreaming houses. I just dreamed fences strong enough to keep men out. She laughed softly. Didn't work. Silas said nothing. Just stood with hands in his pockets, boots rooted in sawdust and shadow. May stood again and faced him. They ask me where their father is sometimes. I tell them he's wind. He passed through, stirred everything up, and moved on. Silas studied her. You don't speak bitter. I've spoken bitter, she said. Didn't make me sweeter. Outside the rain lightened. The sound changed less sorrow, more lullaby. May reached for the lantern and lifted it higher, casting gold across the cradle. I think this is a good place for stories, she said. Even the ones we don't want to tell yet. Cal appeared in the barn doorway, barefoot, rubbing his eyes. Ma, he said, voice thick with sleep. Junie's cold. May moved to him instantly, pulling him into her arms. Silas fetched another blanket from the loft and handed it to her. She wrapped Cal in it, held him close, kissed his temple. She has nightmares, he whispered. About the train leaving us behind. May's voice broke just a little. She wasn't left. She was seen. Silas took a breath. You can bring her in here, he said. The barn's warm tonight. May looked surprised, then grateful. You sure? He nodded. Soon, Junie was curled in the cradle, wide-eyed but quiet, blanket up to her chin. Cal sat cross-legged beside it, humming tunelessly, while May whispered stories of birds with golden wings who carried brave children over snowy mountains. Silas watched from the shadows. He remembered Ella in the garden, planting tomatoes with names she gave them herself. He remembered building that cradle on evenings when her laughter still curled around him like wood smoke. He remembered the silence after. May's voice wrapped around the barn now like balm. I see how they look at me, she said suddenly, not looking up. The town. The women in their corsets, the men with their pity. They think fat means failure. Or laziness. Or some kind of sin. Silas walked to the stall door and leaned against it. They don't know what weight means. No, she said. They don't. Junie stirred. May smoothed her hair. I carried Cal through a winter with no coal. I carried Junie through a fever with no doctor. I carried both through a train ride where nobody offered us more than dust. Silas said, and still you carried them. May looked up. You know why I said yes to that man's letter? She asked. Why? Because he called me beautiful. That was the first time someone wrote it down like it was fact. Silas nodded slowly. Maybe he saw the outside. Maybe he didn't know what he was asking for. May smiled. No man knows. They think they're buying comfort. They don't expect conviction. The rain slowed to a hush. I'm not ashamed of myself, she said. I'm ashamed I ever begged to be less. Silas stepped closer. You don't have to be less here, he said. Not for me. Not for anyone. May's breath caught. The lantern flickered once. I can't pay you for kindness, she said. And I won't owe a man again. You don't owe me, Silas replied. I offered space, not strings. She searched his face. Why? Because I was drowning in silence, and then a woman with mud on her hem and light in her eyes came and reminded me that barns are meant for more than sorrow. She turned away, blinking fast. Junie reached up and grabbed her mother's hand in her sleep. Cal leaned against her shoulder. The cradle creaked gently, holding more than just a child. It held the weight of almost and maybes and what-ifs, now shaped into something warm. May whispered, you know, I used to sing. Silas tilted his head. Before shame took my voice, she said. I sang while cooking, while rocking them to sleep. Then I got quiet. As if silence could protect me. She looked down at her children. Maybe it's time I remembered how. Silas stepped beside her. Then maybe it's time I listened. Pause. And then, softly, so softly it could have been mistaken for rain, she began to hum. Not a song for performance, not something grand. Just a lullaby from somewhere deep, a tune that rose like bread from dough, slow and steady, filling the air with something almost holy. Silas closed his eyes. He didn't know what was coming. But he knew this. The barn was no longer just a place for labor and echoes. It had become a sanctuary. Not because of wood or tools, but because of her. Her voice. Her children. Her quiet defiance. The cradle rocked. The children slept. May looked up at him once more. If I stayed, she said softly, would I be safe here? Not just tolerated, but safe. Silas met her gaze. Safe as I know how to make it. Then, somewhere beyond the barn, the church bell rang once in the wind. A sound not meant for them, yet somehow it rang toward them anyway. Aunt May whispered, as if to the cradle or the ghosts, maybe we weren't left behind. Maybe we were just meant to arrive late. The news came in whispers, as it always did, in places too small for secrets and too proud to admit it. It started with Mrs. Greer, whose lace collars were always pressed and whose judgments arrived faster than Sunday's sermon. She saw May buying flour with her own coin, laughing with the store boy who gave Junie a peppermint for free, and that was enough. A fat woman with joy? That unsettled the order of things. The whisper grew teeth. By the following Tuesday, the town's women had gathered in the church basement ostensibly for quilting, though no thread passed through cloth. Just stories. Just nods. Just questions delivered like stones thrown under lace. Who was she really? What had she done back east to be abandoned at the station? Why was Silas letting her stay? By Thursday the men joined in. Not all just the ones who feared change more than sin. They didn't speak of charity or decency. They spoke of order, propriety, the preservation of appearances. The kind of talk that soured milk and stiffened collars. They drew up a petition. Not a formal one, not something with legal teeth, but worse. A letter signed by hands that had once waved politely, that had once sent jam jars and church bulletins. It declared the Templeton woman and her children a source of concern, unvetted, and morally questionable. They used phrases like inappropriate influence and improper domestic arrangement. The letter made its way to the preacher, who paled when he read it and paler still when he realized he was expected to deliver it. Silas was repairing the windmill blade when the preacher rode up, hat in hand, boots still polished from last week's funeral. His face was pink with discomfort. May stood by the porch, shelling beans with Junie and Cal nearby, dust on their knees and sunlight in their hair. The children looked up at the stranger with guarded eyes. Silas wiped his hands on a rag. Preacher. The man cleared his throat. Mr. McCrae. I come on behalf of the community. Which community? Silas asked. The preacher faltered. The concerned portion. May straightened. Say it plain, Reverend. The preacher looked at her, then at the folded paper in his hand. They ask that you relocate. Quietly. So as not to stir unpleasantness. May laughed once short and sharp. I'm stirring it just by breathing, am I? No one wishes you harm, the preacher said quickly. But they'll do it anyway, Silas muttered. Because they'd rather write her off than write her in. The preacher's face flushed. They fear scandal. She's not scandal, Silas said. She's survival. May folded her arms. Is there a law I broke? No, ma'am. Then I'll stay. Unless you plan to drag me out by my hair. In front of my children. The preacher opened his mouth, closed it, gave Silas a final look, part warning, part plea, then left. The dust from his horse hadn't settled before Cal spoke. What's scandal mean, Ma? May didn't answer at first. She bent to her knees and pulled him close. It means they don't want to understand us, so they call us wrong. Junie frowned. Are we bad? No, baby. We're just seen as different. And different scares cowards. Silas turned the letter over in his hand, then tossed it into the trough. The water blurred the ink until it looked like nothing at all. That night the house was too quiet. May didn't sing. Junie didn't hum. Cal didn't ask about the horses. Even the chickens stayed near the coop, uneasy as if sensing the change. May sat by the fire after the children fell asleep, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes on the flames. They'll never see me as a woman, she said softly. Only a burden. Or worse, a temptation. Silas said nothing. He poured 2 cups of tea and handed her one. She took it without thanks. She was too tired for politeness. I can't stay if it's going to cost you your name, she whispered. My name's just dust if I don't use it to build something. You're not their enemy. I might be now. She sipped her tea and looked away. I don't want to be the reason they turn their backs on you. They already did, May. Years ago, when Ella died and I buried myself with her. She looked at him sharply. I kept breathing, he said, but I stopped living. Until a woman stepped off a train holding 2 children and no apologies. Her lip trembled. She set her cup down too hard. I'm tired of being the apology, she said. Every room I enter, I brace for judgment. For laughter. For men who think kindness earns them ownership, and women who look at my body like it's contagious. Silas leaned forward. Not here. But here's not the whole world, she said. And the world comes knocking eventually. They sat in silence, firelight flickering across the walls like shadows trying to dance. Finally May stood. I should go. Where? Back east. Somewhere colder. Somewhere quieter. You'll be cold but not quiet, he said. You're not built for silence. She almost smiled. Let me take you, he said. If you're going. No, she said. I came here on my own. I'll leave the same. He reached for her hand. She let him. I'm not done hoping, he said. Not yet. She turned away. The next morning she packed. Not all at once. Just enough to say she wasn't bluffing. Cal watched silently. Junie cried. May told them it was only for a little while, just a visit to another town. But they'd heard enough to know a lie when it wore lace. Silas stood outside, arms crossed, watching the sky. It hadn't rained since the preacher left. The clouds hung low but dry like a threat unspoken. May stepped onto the porch, trunk by her side, shawl tight around her shoulders. She looked at him, eyes red but chin lifted. I don't hate you, she said. I don't love you yet, he replied. She blinked. But I could, he added. If you let me. She looked down. I don't know if I can survive being looked at like that again. You already did, he said. Every day since the station. A wagon appeared on the horizon. She'd arranged for it quietly. Just a freighter heading east, with room enough for a trunk and 2 children. Not much else. May looked at the barn. At the fence Cal had helped fix. At the cradle still waiting under the rafters. She didn't cry. She bent down to Junie. Grab your shoes, sweetheart. Junie looked at Silas, then back at her mother. Do we have to? May nodded. Cal gripped the porch railing. All right, May told Silas. He stepped down, walked slowly to the gate. I won't beg, he said. Not because I don't care. But because you deserve to choose your place, not be chosen into one. She nodded. The wagon rattled up. The driver tipped his hat. May lifted Junie into the back. Cal climbed up after. She paused one last time. Silas looked at her like a man watching a door close. I hope they see you, he said. May stepped up, turned, and whispered, I hope you remember what you saw. Then she was gone. And the town, watching from behind curtains, felt very proud of itself. Until the wind shifted. Until the next sun rose and someone knocked on the preacher's door with a different kind of petition. And this time, it came with a signature Silas hadn't yet offered but now was ready to write. The sun had begun its descent, dragging long shadows across the fields like dark fingers reaching for what little light remained. Silas stood at the edge of the barn, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow, but his eyes fixed on the road, not the earth, not the sky, just that stretch of dirt that hadn't seen her boots in 4 days. The ranch was too quiet. The cradle sat untouched. The hens clucked like they were waiting for someone who used to scatter feed while humming a tune no one else knew. Even the windmill turned slower, as if time itself had thickened in her absence. She was gone, yes, but not far. He knew that now. She hadn't gone east. She hadn't boarded the freighter. Instead, she'd gone to the edge of town, rented a room behind the tailor's shop, kept the children inside, and waited for something. For everything. For nothing at all. Silas had not gone after her. Not with haste. Not with pleading. He had waited with the kind of stillness that burns. He gave her space the way a man gives up breath in prayer. But this morning something shifted. He had walked into town just after dawn. Hat low. Words fewer than usual. When he reached the church steps, he waited for Reverend Sims to finish his sweeping. She didn't leave, Silas said simply. The preacher looked up, surprised. No. She was never the one that needed to, Silas added. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not a petition. Not a threat. A marriage license. Already signed. Already ready. I'll marry her, he said. Before sundown. You'll come. Reverend Sims hesitated. They'll protest. They already did. The preacher studied him. Why now? Silas looked past him to the hills beyond the chapel, where the sun painted the ridge like gold and fire. Because no one voted for us, he said. But I'm casting mine now. He turned and walked away, the papers flapping in the wind like something just born. By mid-afternoon, the news had moved faster than the wind. Some called it foolish. Others called it brave. Most just whispered and watched. May was in the room when the knock came, Cal playing with a wooden horse on the floor, Junie tracing flowers onto the windowpane with a stub of chalk. When she opened the door and saw Silas standing there with his collar clean and his voice quiet, she didn't blink. I have a license, he said. She shook her head. You don't need to save me. I'm not, he said. I'm saving myself. Her breath caught. Silas stepped closer. I've lived under silence too long. You filled the house without ever raising your voice. You don't love me, she said softly. I respect you, he said. And I've seen you when no one else dared look. Junie appeared at the doorway behind her, eyes wide. Mama, are we going home? May looked at Silas. Home, she repeated. The wedding was not held in a church. Not under arches or veils. It happened in the field behind Silas's barn, just before the sun kissed the rim of the earth. A few chickens wandered past. The preacher arrived with a Bible in one hand and dust on his shoes. No music played. No bouquet tossed. But every word rang like thunder in quiet hearts. May wore the same dress she had arrived in. A little faded now and a little tighter at the seams. But she stood taller. Junie held the hem while Cal guarded the rings in a tin box lined with straw. Silas stood across from her in his best shirt, collar crooked, hands steady. The preacher cleared his throat. "Do you, Silas McCrae, take this woman not for rescue or redemption but as she is?" "I do," Silas said. "And do you, May Templeton, take this man not as a shelter but as an equal?" "I do," she said, voice like river stone, soft but unbreakable. When they kissed, it wasn't grand or passionate. It was quiet. Sure. A ceiling of something that had already been built in silence, one day, one kindness at a time. Then the sound of hoofs. A group of riders appeared at the edge of the property. Mrs. Greer among them. The banker's wife. The smith's cousin. All dressed like they were attending a hanging. May 10th. Silas turned to face them. "You're late," he said. Mrs. Greer narrowed her eyes. "This isn't legal." "It is," the preacher replied, holding up the license. "Signed and sanctified." She's, the banker's wife began. "She's my wife," Silas interrupted. "And you'll speak to her as you would to me." Silence fell. No one dismounted. No one stepped forward. Then Cal walked to the fence, lifted his chin, and stared down every single one of them with the eyes of a boy who'd been ignored long enough. May reached for Silas's hand. Junie tugged her sleeve. "Mama," she whispered. "They're not clapping." May bent down. "We don't need their hands," she said. "We have our feet. And we're standing." The riders turned slowly one by one and rode off into the rising dark. The sun dipped. The shadows eased. And the wind returned gentler now, brushing over the cradle inside the barn like a lullaby waiting to be sung again. Later that night, after the preacher had gone and the lanterns had been lit, May stood on the porch, watching the horizon. Silas joined her. "You're not afraid?" she asked. "Of them?" "No." She turned to him. "What about of me?" she asked. "Of all this?" He looked at her the way a man looks at a river he's ready to cross. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I'm home." And beneath the wide, unblinking sky, where no votes could touch them, they stood, two people the town never welcomed, finally choosing each other before sundown.